Shrikant, if I told you that I have a friend who gives stock market advice and 5 years in a row, she has beaten the stock market, would you assume that she is a genius and would you take stock advice from her?
5 years in a row.
Yes.
That's very, very interesting.
Okay,
I should probably.
let me make it 8 years in a row.
Then I'll definitely ask for a number.
Correct. Let me prove to you that something like this could have happened even if stocks are picked by complete morons. Okay, a monkey could have done this.
Okay.
So, for example,
Doesn't really bode well for your friend here.
yes, I don't have friends who give stock picking advice for the reason that anybody who thinks they're good at picking stocks, except for one or two real geniuses, everyone else is deluded. Okay. So let me start with my main example. Okay. Now, let's say, let's start with 32 monkeys.
32, okay.
Yeah. And we have each monkey throw darts at a dartboard which has names of
Various
our
stocks.
top 20 stocks in the country, like from Sensex.
Okay.
And we just buy the stocks that the monkeys dart picked.
Okay.
Okay. Just out of complete random chance, there is a 50-50 chance that that stock will go
Up or down?
up or down, right? 50% chance. It's a BSE Sensex stock. So 50% chance it will do better than the Sensex, 50% chance it will do worse than the Sensex.
Yeah.
Okay. So now at the end of 1 year, we started with 32 monkeys. What happens? 16 monkeys have picked losers, but 16 monkeys picked stocks that went up.
50-50 chance. That is why
50-50
16-16.
right?
Okay.
I continue this process for 1 more year.
Okay.
Okay. Now, and I ignore the 16 monkeys who are losers. Clearly, they can't pick stocks well.
Of course they can't. They don't have dart throwing capabilities.
But the 16 who picked winning stocks, I think they are on to something, right? So I continue with them.
Their darts are
repeat the
hitting.
process.
Yes.
End of the second year, half of those have picked losing stocks, but half of those have picked stocks that went up 2 years in a row.
Down to 8 monkeys.
Down to 8 monkeys. Third year,
Down to 4 monkeys.
fourth year,
Down to 2 monkeys.
fifth year.
Down to 1 monkey.
So at the end of 5
5
years, I have one monkey that has picked the winning stock 5 years in a row.
Smart monkey. Or actually, good dart throwing monkey.
Correct. So this is complete randomness, right? You just start with a large enough sample and even idiots can seem like geniuses.
Yeah, but for that one monkey to be your friend, I mean, for your friend to be that one person.
See, if you are the kind of people who go around looking for stock tips, right? All these monkeys are going to gravitate towards you.
Okay.
Especially the ones who somehow through luck managed to pick winning stocks a few years in a row.
Alright, so are you telling me that picking stock is basically as good as monkeys throwing darts?
I am not telling you. There are actual studies. And by actual studies, I don't mean actual studies
with monkeys throwing darts?
Yes, actual studies with monkeys throwing darts. And the monkeys beat most of the mutual fund managers on Wall Street. Okay? There are links. Take a look at the links. There is the amazing chimp who was the 22nd best money manager for the year.
I have only one question.
Yes.
Is the amazing chimp still playing with the stock market and playing with those darts?
So
because I would like to follow that chimp.
So
clearly his darts are hitting the right targets.
So here was the thing, right? You have hundreds of friends who pick stocks. Okay. And at the end of 1 year, half of them have picked losers, so you stop talking to them. This is how it works. I mean, most people who claim to have made a lot of money on... There's another problem, right? One is just this sheer randomness.
Right.
Another is that our brains are very funny that way.
Monkey brains.
Our monkey brains, right? The stocks that you lose money on, you forget. But that one stock, which went from 100 to 322... right? You remember that and you are like, for the next 10 years, you will keep talking about that one stock that went from 100 to 322.
Yeah.
I mean, even I remember that.
Look, golfers play a lot of games, but they remember the one thing they remember the most is that time they scored a hole in one.
If you have a stock picking friend, okay, not a full professional, but a friend who thinks they are good at picking stocks, ask them, do you write down in an Excel spreadsheet each and every stock that you bought and how much money you made And here is the tricky question. Do you compare that to how much the Sensex made in the same amount?
Look, I have always known that ETFs, exchange traded funds, are a better option any day. Mutual funds are a better option any day. But what you're basically telling me is that the stock market is nothing but a game of randomness. Like throwing darts on a board. Randomness.
No. Basically, there is a very, very, very tiny fraction of people who know which ones are going to go up. Okay, that, by the way, in stock market parlance, that is called alpha. Okay. So there is a tiny fraction of people who have alpha. Okay. Those guys get insane amounts of money on Wall Street or Dalal Streets. They are not your friends. Okay. And if they have a stock tip, they are not telling you unless you have insane amounts of money. Okay. So anyone giving you stock tips is a monkey. They are fooled by randomness. Just to complete that thought, right?
Yeah.
I have one friend who actually has alpha. And the way he gets it is not by getting stock tips on WhatsApp, right? He actually goes and talks to the CEOs of companies. He talks to like the second level managers, and he talks to the bankers who are giving them loans. And that level of analysis has to be done if you want to know what is going to go up. So basically, there are two principles that I want you to understand, right? One is how humans misunderstand luck and think it was design.
Okay.
Right? Because it's just, something happened and then something else happened.
Correct.
And we assume that the second thing happened because of the first thing.
The correlation, causation, confusion.
Correct. This has a Latin name, the post hoc fallacy. The full phrase is post hoc ergo propter hoc.
Okay.
Meaning this happened after this.
Okay.
Therefore, it happened because of this. Humans have a tendency to think
mistake
like
correlation for causation.
So let me give an example. You have a 5-year-old kid.
I do.
The kid has asthma.
I do.
Right? And all the medicines you have tried, modern medicines, have not worked. So you go to Hyderabad and you get like this fish medicine where you put a live fish in that person's nose and the kid gets cured.
Down the throat, not the nose. Down the throat.
Oh, no,
but yes.
No, nose is the medicine for getting a male child.
I don't know why he knows all of this, but I'm worried that he knows all of this.
No, actual relatives have suggested this to me, okay? And all of these are a result of the fallacies we are talking about today. Okay. Basically, what has happened to the kid with asthma is that lots of kids have asthma when they are young and because their lungs are not yet fully developed. Correct. And around the age of 5, it just gets okay by itself. Yes. So, but parents who don't know that go around trying a whole bunch of things, and the last thing they try just before it gets better by itself, they assume that was the cure.
Yes, that is what usually happens.
Correct. So this is the post hoc fallacy. And a close relative of this fallacy is something called survivorship bias. Okay. So let me give another lovely example of survivorship bias.
Okay.
So in World War II, the Allies were sending airplanes over Germany to drop bombs, and Germany was of course shooting them with guns,
anti-aircraft guns.
And what they decided was they were losing planes.
Correct.
So they decided we should strengthen the body of the planes. And what they did was when the planes came back, they studied the planes to look at which places have bullet holes. Okay.
Yes, of course.
And they said, and they found the clear pattern. There were some places no bullet holes and some places with lots of bullet holes.
Yeah, the wings, I remember this image. The wings had a lot of bullet holes. The tail had a lot of bullet holes.
So this is a famous image. If you look it up, you will find it. But then they said, fine, the parts with the bullet holes, let us strengthen those. And you don't want to strengthen the whole airplane. Why?
Because it's a war and there are limited resources and you have to conserve your steel and whatnot.
You have to conserve steel, and plus aircraft becomes heavier and takes more fuel, all kinds of
problems. Science, yes, of
course.
But
let us strengthen just the parts that have the most bullet holes. That's what they said. And there was a mathematician called Abraham Wald, and he said, you guys are idiots. Let us strengthen the parts which have 0 bullet holes.
What? Okay, Why?
Because the point is that the aircrafts which got hit in those places
did not
crashed and never came back.
Yes.
Right? So
the aircrafts that survived gave you a pattern that you thought was the pattern that you needed to work on, but that's not the truth.
So this is the survivorship bias. We only study the survivors. This is true of airplanes. This is true of startups. This is true of celebrities. This is true of businesses. And this is true of
Pandemics.
This is true of JEE studies, right? So, yeah, I mean, there was a time when I used to go around talking about how I studied for the JEE, and it became very popular, and there were like all kinds of websites copying my article and pasting it and all of that, right? Later, a few people pointed out to me that, maybe it's just something weird about you, right? Just because you did that doesn't mean that is what caused you to crack JEE, right? Somebody else doing that might not have. Yeah. Nobody is going around asking them stories about how you studied for JEE, right? Unless you compare how the successful people studied and compare that with did the unsuccessful ones did not do the same thing. Only then it makes sense. Otherwise, it is survivorship bias. Right?
Correct. Because you survived JEE, you went on to do an IIT education, and you got an IIT degree. Yeah. You took that correlation and converted it into a causation purely on the basis of your survivorship in this process. Correct. There are people who didn't do JEE like me.
Right.
Who may have followed the same pattern but did not get it.
Right. And I do have friends now who did very similar things. Didn't do the JEE, but you have to know that there is survivorship bias, right? Okay. Another example, let's just take COVID as an example, right? And this happens even with like fancy research reports and science and so on. Right? So there was a whole bunch of hospitals which reported that they are seeing a bunch of cases of COVID reinfections. This was in 2021 or so. Right? We are seeing reinfections, and the reinfections are more severe than the original infection. Okay. And there was no reason to assume that the hospital is lying, but still this could be a totally wrong report. For the simple reason, again, survivorship bias. Okay. This is a different kind of survivorship. Okay. Imagine that 100 people get reinfected, 10 of them get a severe infection, 90 of them get a mild infection, they just have kerosene at home and never bother going to the hospital. The 10 severe ones end up in the hospital. So now the hospital thinks that all infections are severe. But in reality, it's only the severe ones that came to the hospital. That is survivorship bias, right?
Like that.
In the trip to the hospital, the mild cases didn't survive. They went back home. Right, that's what it means. Survivorship bias.
Didn't survive in the sense, didn't survive
the analysis.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and just to the reason why it is so popular is that human brain has evolved to like stories and just so explanations. Right.
Okay.
So, whenever there is a sequence of things that happen, and somebody can weave a story around that, we like it. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I live my life parading around as a storyteller, and I basically take a lot of situations and then weave them together.
Correct. In fact, we will do an entire episode on this. That never, if you are trying to convince someone, never just give them a bunch of facts. Instead, give them a story. So, stories. Yeah. Humans love stories, and stories have a big impact on humans. And all post hoc fallacies are stories. Right? Yes. All survivorship biases. I mean, we love survivor stories, right? The number of movies.
We love stories. Yeah. Period.
No, we just love them. We especially love survivor stories because, Sylvester Stallone was down to his last $20. He sold his dog because he didn't have money. Yeah. And then when a producer
bought Rocky from him.
No, not bought. Wanted to buy Rocky. He refused. He said, no, I want to be the director. Even though he didn't have money. He insisted that I will not give it to you unless you make me the director. Thankfully, the producer did make him the director, and it went on to be a huge hit. And Sylvester Stallone bought his dog back for $20,000.
Such a beautiful story.
Which he probably sold for $20 or $100 or something.
Yeah, right? But it's his doggy. You cannot put a price on love, and etc.
But this is survivorship bias, right? Very likely that there were a bunch of other actors. Very likely they were about to sell their story, and they insisted, I want to be the director. And the producer said,
not happening. Bye.
Not happening. But just to drive home the point, let's take some silly examples of survivorship bias, right?
Okay, this I'm curious about.
You know the game Russian roulette?
Of course, I know the game Russian roulette. I've never played it because I'm smart.
You have a revolver.
And I know it because I'm alive.
You have a revolver with 6 compartments on only one bullet.
Yes.
And you like...
Look, everybody knows Russian roulette. Yeah.
So if you do a survey of do you like Russian roulette, 5 out of 6 people will say great game. I made a lot of money. Why?
Yeah, the number 5 out of 6 is important because generally a revolver contains 6 chambers and one of it is a bullet. 6. 5 out of 6 do not have a bullet.
Correct.
Yes.
I mean, if you do an online survey, okay, and you ask, do you like taking online surveys? You're going to get 100% yes rate, right? Because the people who don't like online surveys don't take online surveys.
Yeah, but why would you do an online survey about liking online surveys?
Okay, so you think these are silly examples. Okay, now
these are silly examples.
Let me give you real examples.
Please.
A rickshaw driver returns a wallet. Every 3 or 4 months, our newspapers have the story about how a rickshaw driver went out of his way to return a wallet. And it's like, yes, rickshaw drivers are the best.
We need good news, man. We need good news in our newspapers, in our news channels and whatever. So please let it...
The point is that all the rickshaw drivers who run away with the money never get reported. But yeah, okay, you want good stories, right? I will give you the reverse. Every time you read about, some guy who got beaten up somewhere and some guy who had an accident and whatever, news never reports, okay, yes, today Shrikant drove on the roads and didn't have an accident. Today Shrikant, had a transaction with somebody and the other guy didn't con him. Right?
I literally had an accident 3 days ago.
So, the problem is that the regular 90% of occurrences which are normal don't get reported in the news, right? So everything in the news is like biased reporting like this.
Yeah, because news is essentially meant to inform you of things that are not regular.
Right.
Yeah.
Except that our brains
tend to think of it as not the highlights reel but as the actual continuous real life. Correct. So I agree with you there.
See, our brains evolved to understand 150 people at a time.
Yeah.
Right? Dunbar's number. Check out. We have an episode on that.
Important episode. It's a wonderful episode.
Right? So if you only knew 150 people and then anything bad happened to one of them, you find out about it and your brain says, oh, this is important. I have to remember this because the same thing can happen to me.
Correct.
Right? That's a very good thing. And that's how we learn to survive. That's how our brain has been calibrated. Now suddenly newspapers go to 150 crores of people. So now the amount of bad news you get has been multiplied by 1 crore. But your brain hasn't adjusted to any of that.
And it can't adjust to any of that because it's a huge number. 150 crores.
What you learn from today's episode, the takeaway is that be aware that this might just be luck. Okay, this might not be normal. Ask yourself, what are the chances that this just happened completely out of random and doesn't have any actual explanation?
Yeah, because a lot of the examples that you've given so far are essentially random occurrences that we have tried to put a reasoning to.
Yeah, not tried to. We have put reasons without realizing that we have put non-existent reasons, right?
So basically, every time something happens, first ask the question, did it happen by random?
Yeah.
And then ask the question, okay, if it did not happen by random, was there a cause to it?
Yeah.
But never ascribe...
Even before that, is this just simply survivorship bias, right?
Okay.
So, and train yourself to recognize examples like this, which is why what I'm going to do is that go through a whole bunch of examples like this that will help you, right? So, one thing that is heard quite a lot, especially in startup circles, is that college is a waste of time. You should drop out of college. Do you know why? Because Bill Gates dropped out of college and started Microsoft. Mark Zuckerberg dropped out of college when he started Facebook. Steve Jobs is a college dropout. So obviously, if you drop out of college, you will become Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs.
Right? This is where the concept fails because I dropped out of college. I'm not Steve Jobs.
Exactly. There are two things that explain this. One is, of course, that all the people who dropped out of college and failed miserably. This happens to most of the dropouts. nobody talks about them. This is clear survivorship bias. Okay. The second part here is also costly signaling, right? They got into Harvard, and in case of Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, both are Harvard. Steve Jobs is Stanford.
Yeah.
And then they dropped out, right? Already the most important part of college, especially getting into a top college, is costly signaling. We have an episode on this, check it out, right? 2 episodes.
Essentially, they were good enough to get into Harvard and Stanford, and then they dropped out, which basically meant that they were probably better than what Harvard and Stanford could offer them. So them dropping out is a wholly different thing.
Right. So costly signaling, right? That explains that, right? Another is every feel-good movie, right? Like the these girls who are want to do wrestling, and their father makes them do wrestling and pushes them so hard, and then they become greatest. Then they become get medals for the country.
Yes, they do.
Has anybody made movies, a list of the remaining lakh movies about fathers who pushed their daughters and then the daughters had mental breakdowns? No, this is
it does happen. Bias. It does happen. A lot of parents push their kids, and the kids do not turn out to be like the Fogat sisters, or do not turn out to be like any of the other stars. There are only 11 players in a cricket team. 11. There are 11 million or maybe 11 crore people who are trying to get into that 11% cricket team.
This is true for all celebrities, right? Most celebrities. There is a power law going on there. The top few are extremely successful, right? Don't take advice from successful people, basically, right?
This goes against all of the advice that we've heard so far. Look, we have done an entire episode on learning from Jeff Bezos, and you telling people don't take advice from successful people is not really a great look.
So you have to know which advice is actually useful.
That is better advice.
Just because a successful person, I wake up every day at 5 a.m. and take a cold shower, is probably not good advice.
Yeah, there might be other reasons why they take cold showers at 5 a.m.
Take your last 100 rupees and take a train to Bombay and hang out in Andheri and become an actor. Worked for Amjad Khan and probably worked for Shah Rukh Khan. But the median person who does this is still hanging out in Andheri and is a waiter in some coffee shop.
Yeah.
Right? So, but this, not just celebrity, business advice. Okay. There is a book called Good to Great by Jim Collins. Okay. In the late 90s, he picked 11 great companies, not just good, great, who beat their competition so badly. Right. And then he looked at what are the things these great companies did and gave that as business advice.
Makes sense.
The book sold 3 million copies. At that time, if you had bought stock in those 11 companies, right, that set of stocks would have underperformed the S&P 500 for the next 10-20 years, right? In fact, 2 of those companies went under, and most of the other companies did badly. This was just the entire book was survivorship bias. Just take a list of companies which have somehow managed to survive and assume that everything that they did was the cause of them doing well so far. Right?
Yeah, the trend is now slightly shifted to learning from failures as well. But even in that
let's look at another example, right? Okay. So FedEx. Okay. Right? Everybody knows FedEx, huge company all over the world. So Fred Smith, the founder, in the early days, they were doing badly, right? He was down to the last $5,000 and they needed to make a $24,000 payment for fuel, right? So on a Friday night, he went to Las Vegas. He gambled with the last 5K on blackjack, won 27,000, used that to make the payment. Company survived and then went on to become FedEx, one of the top companies in the world.
Anybody who reads this and tells you take your last $5,000 and gamble it and make $27,000 is duping you. That is something you should never do.
Right.
But it worked for Fred. It will not necessarily work for you.
in general, founders taking excessive gambles is something we keep hearing again and again and again, not realizing that this is a lot of survivorship bias, right? Most business analysts analyzes only the successful companies. How many of them go and analyze the companies that failed? Not many, because those companies are not around anywhere. Right? I mean, it's very difficult to analyze companies that don't exist. Right?
The true failures are not around.
Exactly.
Yeah. But there are still analysis of founders who previously failed and still managed to succeed.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, just a slightly more convoluted form of survivor bias, right?
Yeah, because the founder still survived.
But let's take, this is just all over the place. Medical advice, right? Yeah. Most nutrition advice, most babas with magical cures are, have this post hoc fallacy.
Shout out to the liver doctor. If you haven't subscribed to his channel, subscribe to his channel. He does some amazing content both on YouTube and on Twitter.
So I believe it was Leo Tolstoy who said that if you have a disease and then somebody gives you a treatment intended to cure that disease, and then if you do get cured of that disease, no power on earth can convince you that it wasn't that medicine which cured you. But the human body is amazing. It cures itself so often that we don't realize that's what is happening. And that's why homeopathy lives on and on and on and on. I don't want to say that you should ignore all advice, especially from successful people, right? I mean, successful people do have traits that make them successful, right? I'm never going to say that, hard work is all survivorship bias, right?
Hard work is better than Harvard.
Make sure you are taking advice that is common to a lot of different fields, for example. Make sure that there is no survivorship bias there.
It pains me a little bit that a lot of the advice ends up being squarely in survivorship bias category because that drastically reduces the amount of advice that you can actually accept at times.
No, so see, what you have to do is not just take advice blindly, right? Especially if the advice seems a little counterintuitive. Okay? If you look at the advice and it comes with an explanation that makes sense, and then check around if other people are saying, yes, I tried it and it worked, then maybe there is a much higher chance.
And I'm guessing a lot of life and a lot of advice anyways at the end of the day ends up being a game of randomness in the end to some extent, because what worked for others may or may not work for you, even if it is great advice.
Right. Yeah, I'd see there is a lot of luck in success.
Yeah.
And most men flatter themselves that their great actions gave them success and don't realize the role of luck in their success, right? But the reverse, I would say, is karmanyavadhikaraste, right? There is luck, but you can increase the chances of luck by working hard, by focusing on, is this the right process to follow?
Focus on the process, not the results.
Try to think from first principles.
Yeah.
Right? Don't just blindly go, well, that person is very successful and they said that you should go for a run every 5 a.m. or something like that.
You should go for a run every morning at 5 a.m. It is good in general for health. But anyway, the point here being, use. Karmanyavadhikaraste, by the way, is an episode we did very early on in this series. Look for it. We'll also put a link in the description. But this is basically the crux of the story today. A lot of randomness happens in life, which gets ascribed as cause for things that happen afterwards. Post hoc fallacies, survivorship bias. Keep that in mind every time you want to do something or you're looking to do something or something happens with you, and you will have a very interesting life. Shrikant, Naveen.
Thank you.
FutureIQ.
Thank you for watching till the end. If you liked this episode, check out these others. You might like them also. And please share with your friends. I'm sure they will also like these. Thank you.